What we want to talk about is divergent views. Before lunch, we talked about that board culture and how one creates that positive board culture. And we talked about some divergent views, some renegade behaviors. But what we want to talk about now is how we manage polarities. We're going to discuss that. First of all, let's just be honest with one another. Here's Trower calling us out. What are the human behaviors? We're just normal human beings, and board members, based on the data that she's done, are bored at meetings when they're reported to. We all have as a goal not to report to the board, and the board doesn't want us to report. But it's not the kind of engagement we want, right? And we are data driven, so as a school, we're always looking around for data to give you. But that, again, the board I was meeting with yesterday as part of we had a whole set of data. It was very interesting data, well-resourced, and we jumped quickly to solutions rather than talked first about who we are and what the data told us about ourselves. And my psychologist wife would tell me this, right? We human beings, it's hard to deal with ambiguity. It's nice to know the answer. Not just the college board believes that, but we all believe that. And you are all successful, have been successful in whatever it is you've chosen to do because you've found the solution, because you've solved the problems, because you've found the silver bullets. Simple solutions to complex problems are not what's really readily available. And there's nothing like instant gratification. To leave that board meeting at 9:30, I keep picking on 9:30. How many people meet after 9:30? Anybody? No? At night, yeah. No, great, bravo. Okay. I work, so I shouldn't tell true stories out of, I work with a number of board members who go into the, I work in Connecticut, so they work in the city and then come out of the city at night, any of you who used to work in New York. And so, the train doesn't come back till 7 or 8, and so sometimes we have conference calls for committees at 8:30. I'm barely awake then. But anyways, instant gratification, we seek that. And taking time to talk about ambiguous issues is not easy to do. It's harder. Confronting values and beliefs is challenging, yet is required for effective governance because values and beliefs underlie our decisions, right? Underlie our actions. So it's one thing to say, we need to cut the budget by 5%. You all know how to do that. You say to the head of school, cut that budget by 5%. That's very specific. The question before you decide that, based on the financial and statistical analysis you do, is to say, are there operating principles rooted in our values that we want to honor as the head of school then makes the decision to cut the budget by 5%? Why did you pick this department instead of that department? Well, because the cash was readily available. It was kind of liquid in that department. Well, no, what are the criteria that you used? Schools often use, I learned this a long time ago, you look at 3 criteria if you're thinking about cutting a budget or making that kind of decision. How central is the activity or the person to the mission of the school, right? How good is the delivery of the service? The person, or one of the worst days I've had as a head of school was I had to let go a faculty member who had been at school for 30 plus years, taught photography. And photography is a wonderful, wonderful area of study. But cinematography now and digital photography is really important. Good digital photographers need to know how to do black and white, need to understand how to do that. But if you're a faculty member who teaches only photography and hasn't moved with the curriculum to teach digital in a part of the country where digital is the industry, then that's a place where you say central to the mission of the school, quality of the service that's delivered. And the third criterion is number of students, faculty, family affected. Candidly, there weren't a lot of students interested in taking photography. When we announced we were moving to a more digital studio kind of place, enrollments shot up. This was a fellow who said, I don't want to do that, Jack. I'm just not interested in doing that. And I then said to him, but I feel like a schmo. Well, thank you for your 35 years of service, and can I help you clean out your office at the end of the year? Not one of the better days I've had. I went home, Carol said, how was your day? I said, just plain lousy. But those, I don't know, how did I get off on budget cuts? Anyways, part of the values that underlie the action. That's how I got there, Debra.
And they're all going back to those 3 points that you said.
Yeah.
What you do when you're making the budget
Right,
criteria.
yeah.
Does anybody want to hear those 3 points again?
Centrality to the mission. How about that for an ambiguous conversation? How do you figure what that is? How about that for a conversation about cultural norms? Oh, we, blah, 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 Academy produces global citizens. What does that mean? You know? Well, I visited 3 countries last year. My passport, I had to get my passport, I get new pages for my passport. Does that make you a digital citizen? Do you have the I'm way off now. Do you have the cross-cultural competency? How do you define that? How do you measure that? We all, I'm sure in every one of your schools, I'm really off now, every one of your schools, global citizenship appears somewhere in one of the prosaic passages, right? It's there. So how do you do that? What's important about it? We used to, when I was president of SYA, we used to talk about academic tourism. You know, we went with Madame for 2 weeks to Paris with the same kids I've been in school with since kindergarten, and we sort of cruised around Paris, and we spoke French, and we bought a baguette, and we enjoyed some chocolate, and then I guess I'm a global citizen. Anyways.
You gotta do the other 2.
Centrality to the mission. I don't know why I agree to come and do these things with her. Centrality to the mission, quality of the program that is produced, and the number of students, faculty, number of people affected, A-F-F-E-C-T, right? It's the verb, when you're thinking about making decisions. And those are values driven, right? You want to know that. Let's keep going, Jack. Okay, evidence of generative behavior. We talked about this before. Collegial, not congenial, where everybody's nice, but they all talk about it afterwards in the parking lot. You want to eliminate that. Dissent is encouraged and expected. Better outcomes, groupthink, robust discourse. The question, you know, what are we missing? What haven't we asked about that question, about that issue? What didn't I ask about the photography issue in the curriculum? I looked at the numbers. We had pressure to be more digital. What did I miss a question that was important to ask in terms of good generative behavior? And again, renegades are sanctioned, elevate the governance committee's value. Oh, let's go back. All this again has to do with the board's role in the goal setting, clarification of roles, and as you clarify these roles, as I said to you before, heads of school, I think you ought to ask your board chairs when you're at the end of the year, you have your annual review. Let's talk about, maybe you had a wonderful year, you didn't disagree about anything. Let's talk about what are we going to do when the conflict does arise, when the staff thinks we ought to do this and the board thinks we ought to do that. That's what we're going to talk about right now. So here we go. Is it a problem or is it a polarity? Barry Johnson's book, Polarity Management, 1996, and now it's hot. But Barry Johnson, Polarity Management, great book. A problem can have a right or a best answer. There's a solution. And human nature being what it is, we like to find solutions, you know? That's the best part about it. Polarities are different, though. It's a paradox, it's a conundrum, or it's a contradiction. It doesn't seem to make any sense. There doesn't seem to be an easy way to find your answer. It's a dilemma that appears to be ongoing. You know, cut the budget by 5%, boom, we're done. We're going to recover and we'll move on. That's not a polarity management. It seems to be unsolvable and contains seemingly opposing views, right? And often discussed in adversarial terms. Short term versus the long term. We need to pay attention to the short term, Jack. No, it's the long term we're invested in. Well, how are we going to do both? That's important. Support versus accountability. Your faculty member, a head of school, will say to the faculty member, I want to support you, but you got to be accountable. You can't do what you did yesterday in class. You can't not supervise the 4th graders when they're on that trip. I should have asked, what was the supervisory plan? Well, I guess I didn't, because I just assumed you were going to do that. I assumed that I was supporting you in that, and then you didn't supervise them, and the child got lost for 3 minutes, and then I'm sideways with the board or with somebody. Here's the easiest one to put up in the slide, hardest thing to do. We're all disruptive. We're all innovative. Change versus stability. In our schools, I think it's Bella who says schools are collections of memories, right? Debra, what is your tradition is, say that again?
Peer pressure from dead people.
Peer pressure from dead people. Remember that one. Peer pressure from dead people. Change versus innovation. And boy, you better make sure you're changing because the school down the street's changing, right? So what's this tradition stuff? The ivy on the walls, that was nice 30 years ago. Doesn't work anymore. Let's ask the folks in the Silicon Valley. Responsibility versus freedom. Do we say that to the students? We want to give you the freedom to design the mural any way you want it, or to plan the Halloween dance any way you want it, or to whatever, to plan the bottle buyback program any way that you want it. To have the freedom to do that, but when you get out there at the city council and you started trashing the local beverage company because they sell bottles of bottled water, that wasn't being terribly responsible. Needs of individual students versus the community. This is the easiest one of all, right? How many of you, heads of school know this, have sat in your office with the student who was struggling academically, maybe had a learning disorder of some kind, or was the most disruptive kid in the 4th grade class? You want to try and meet the needs of that child. You want to support the family who's there saying, please help us. We can't go anyplace else. Do you know what it's like at the other place? We can't do that. And as soon as they leave your office, then the other parent group comes in and says, do you know how disruptive Jack is? And the teacher sort of says, God, I really want to work with him, Jack, but it disrupts the whole day and the whole class. And it starts at 7:45 and it doesn't end until 3:30 when she leaves. The need of the individual versus the need of the community. Here are the polarities, right? Is there a solution? Some might say, sure, dismiss the kid. Well, think about that. So this is Johnson's polarity management. Have a chance to look at it. And this is what it looks like. Graphically, this is what we end up doing. We may not have that conversation. We may not pose ourselves that way when we're talking to the family whose child is disruptive. Or how about the student who really misbehaves? Who does something, those freshman boys don't think, they just do, right? When I was a young head of school, I used to say to them, what were you thinking? I don't do that anymore, because they weren't, right? And they go, I don't know, Dr. Creeden. I say, yeah, I get that. But you've got to figure out what are you going to do with that child who did engage in behavior that it's most egregious. And it's the first time, and they're just a 9th grade boy, but the faculty member wants lop off their head. The dean of students says, Jack, if we don't do this, we're going to be in big trouble. He's a 9th grade boy. He's stupid. That's it. Ask the cognitive psychologist. He's just stupid. Social emotional people will tell you. He won't do that when he's a senior, one hopes. Highly adversarial. So in the leadership sense, so what are the leadership polarities that you all, board members and faculty and heads of school, find themselves in? Confidence versus humility. Are you Mother Teresa? Or are you, I don't know, somebody else? I make a political comment, but I'm not going to, right? Dr. J. Remember Dr. J? You know what Dr. J is? They didn't design plays around Dr. J. They designed plays around Michael Jordan. He's confident. What did Michael Jordan say? There's only 30 seconds left. We're down by 2. Well, down by 1 because we didn't have 3-point lines then. We're down by 1. Give me the ball. I want to do that. That's the confident leadership, as opposed to servant leadership, as opposed to the people who say, do good and disappear. There's a polarity. What kind of leader are you? Control and empowerment. I'm notorious for this, right? My wife teaches psychology. When she gets to the section on adult development and talks about compulsive behavior and type A personalities, she uses me as an example. 30 years of bad behavior. But so I know let me control it. You know, if I do it, it'll get done. I just know that. Versus empowering the chair of the art department to shepherd through that student-designed mural, as opposed to having them meet with me. And the art chair can be there too, but I'm going to do that. Versus empowering students, faculty members, boards, empowering the head of school. Well, that's a scary thought. Say, you know what, Jack? I'm a little nervous about that, but it sounds like that's a head of school responsibility. Go do it, right? Or the head of school who calls up the board chair and who says, I want to tell you something. I don't want you to do anything. Whoa, yeah, I'm the board chair. I'm in control. No, you want to empower the head of school to solve that problem. That's a polarity. Candor and diplomacy. You know, you just in your family, in your business, you've got plenty of examples that you can provide here. The people who just sort of tell it like it is and are pretty proud of telling it like it is. And then the people who try to be diplomatic to help people move through things. Individual versus group work, you know, again, I can do it myself. It's easier to do it myself versus let the group do it. Or the teacher who has to stand by and watch the fourth graders who are trying to do something together sort of flounder and then hope that the one child in that group is just going to take responsibility and get it done instead of the work being done by the group. It all leads us to VUCA-U. You all know this, right? VUCA-U is what the U.S. War College calls the state we live in. The armed forces, men and women in the armed forces are preparing for VUCA. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. How'd you like to go to work every day planning on those principles, right? We just want the carpool line to operate on time. This is what these guys have to do every single day. But that's the world you live in right now. That's the world you're called upon to lead, and it's one where it's all about these ambiguities. How about this from the research from the Harvard Business Review? The best senior teams thrive on disagreement. Well, here we're being disruptive again, right? And what do? They have these tensions, the risks versus results. Can you deliver on the day-to-day? That second grade curriculum, that new STEM or STEAM program in the upper school that you got to deliver on now, versus counting on, excuse me, the long term, the change that you want to take. Can you live with those polarities, short term versus long term? How about the external look versus the internal pull? The internal pull is we know who we are, we know what we do well. Why are you messing with this, Jack? Because if you look externally, if you scan the horizon, you say, whoa, we better do something different. You look at the data that Amada presented to you. You got to say, boy, there's a message there. And for each school, each board, there may be a different message, but boy, there are 100 messages about the future there. It's the story Amada told about, so I can say this because I was part of the deal, the arrogance, hubris, right? Hubris brought down all of Shakespeare's tragic figures. The hubris of us and the NAS board when we said, charter schools? I don't care about charter schools. They're not going to do it. Don't pay any attention to charter schools. And you've seen the data. Or now it's the like the alt school in California, right? These little pop-ups. Oh, not to worry, Jack. They're not going to bother us. In some parts of the country, I don't know if it's in the South, certainly in the Southwest, the home school environment and the competition is very real. Is that real here in the South? Yeah, it's real, right? Oh, never happened. First of all, who would want to spend the whole day with their son or daughter teaching them? You gotta be crazy to do that, but it's there. So scan the external environment and at the same time stay true to who you were. NIS said, we know what NIS schools do. That's not a core value in a charter school. We know what that's all about. The results of the research with teams with higher levels of trust, I think we heard that word this morning, transparency, team-first attitude, and collective pride perform better. excuse me, that's the positive board culture at play. All of those words tie into the positive board culture. The question for board chairs, for you all, is to say, how do I build that in? That's really, really hard to do. It's next level hard, the students would say, compared to just cutting the budget by 5% or saying, yeah, let's put a few more fences in the security guard and 20 more cameras. May all be needed, may all be important, but trust, transparency, really different. So interesting from the business review. And then this top-down versus bottom-up innovation. Here's how I look at it. I love when the chair of the English department comes in and I say to him, so how's that new English teacher doing that we just hired? None of us acknowledge that we hire brand new teachers in independent schools, but we do. Someone's got to hire them. And the chair of the department says, well, she's okay, Jack, but she's kind of a pain in the butt. You know, she's got all these different ideas and different ways to resource information and collect information and share information. It's just exhausting. And I say, oh, that's too bad. And off they go, and I think, way to go. You know, we hired someone who's going to push the chair of the English department.